So we are now going to begin part 2 of The Knight's Tale. You should have your copy of The Knight's Tale. You should open up to page 99 where we begin part 2, and you should also have your good versus bad fortune notes. When we left part 1, we were talking about whether Palamon or Arcite has it better. Who is in the better situation to woo Emily or to try and get Emily to fall in love with him. So, part 2. Here we begin. When Arcite had come to Thebes, he swooned and said alas many times a day, for he was never more to see his lady. To sum up his woe briefly, so much sorrow came to any other creature being, which is or shall be as long as the world endures. His sleep, his food, his drink were banished from him, so that he grew lean and dry as the shaft of a spear. His eyes were hollow and frightening to look at. His complexion was sallow and pale as dead ashes. He was given to solitude and ever alone, and wailing all night as he uttered his complaint. If he heard a song or an instrument being played, he would weep so that he could not be stopped. Also, his spirits were so feeble, low, and changed that no one could recognize his speech or his voice, even if one were listening to it. In his moodiness, he behaved for all the world, not only like one afflicted with the lover's malady, called Helios, but also rather more as having the mania caused by the humor of melancholy in the front cell of his brain, where fantasy resides. Briefly, both the habits and the state of mind of this woeful lover, Sir Arcite, were turned completely upside down. So, bad fortune. Arcite is physically and mentally deteriorating because he is away from Emily. He's actually having thoughts of suicide. His physical appearance changes, his voice changes, his demeanor changes, to the point where he's unrecognizable. So under bad fortune, assure that you have number 13 down. Why should I continually relate his woe? For when a year or two he had endured this cruel torment and this pain and woe, then, in Thebes in his country, as I said, one night as he was lying asleep, it seemed to him that the winged god Mercury stood before him and told him to be of good cheer. So he goes on for 2 years or so in this manner, and then he has a dream one night where the god Mercury appears to him. Mercury held his sleep-inducing staff upright in his hand and wore a hat upon his shining hair. The god was dressed, as Arcite noticed, as he had been when Argus had his slumber. He said to Arcite, "You are to go to Athens. The end of your woe is destined for you there." At those words, Arcite awoke and jumped up. "Now, truly, no matter how much I suffer for it," he said, "I shall go to Athens at once, and I shall not hesitate for dread of death to see my lady, whom I love and serve. In her presence, I will care not if I die." So what he believes is the god Mercury comes to visit him in his sleep, and he is told to go to Athens. You have to go back to Athens. Your end of your misery will be at that point. And Arcite realizes that he'll be breaking the code of chivalry, but says, "It's okay, I accept the consequences." With these words, he caught up a large mirror and saw that his complexion has completely changed and that his face looked entirely different. Instantly, it came into his mind that since his face was so disfigured with the sickness which he had undergone, the sickness is his love for Emily, he might well, if he bore himself humbly, live unknown in Athens ever after and see his lady nearly every day. Immediately, he changed his clothes and dressed himself as a poor laborer. All alone, except for a squire who knew his secret and his whole situation, and who was disguised like Arcite as a poor man, he traveled the shortest way to Athens. So when Arcite looks in the mirror, he says, no one's going to recognize me. So he will dress as if he's not a knight, that he is of a lower station, and try and live in disguise in Athens. He went one day to the court, and at the gate offered his services to fetch and carry out whatever kind of labor anyone devised. To speak shortly of this matter, he got employment with a chamberlain who attended upon Emily. For Arcite was shrewd and could soon find out which of all the servants served her. So he got a job working for someone who works for Emily. He could hew wood and carry water handily, for he was young and really strong, and also big and powerfully boned, enough to do whatever anyone could devise for him. He was in this service for a year or two as page of the chamber of lovely Emily. He said that he was called Philostrato. So he changes his name to Philostrato, and he serves in a chamber next to Emily. Okay? There was never a man of his rank who was half so well liked in the court. He was so gentle in his manners that his fame ran throughout the court. They said it would be a good deed for Theseus to raise his rank and put him into honorable service, where he might exercise his ability. Thus, in a little while, his reputation, both for his deeds and his speech, had spread to the point that Theseus took him so near him as to make him a squire of his chamber, and gave him money to maintain his station. Also, there was brought to him from his country, yearly and very privately, his income. But he spent it suitably and discreetly, so that no one wondered how he got it. He led his life in this fashion for 3 years, and conducted himself in peace, and in war too, so well that Theseus held no one else dearer. Now I leave our sight in this bliss, and will speak a little of Palamon. So the good fortune that comes out of this is a couple of things. So you make sure you have all of this down. Arcite has a vision of Mercury coming to him and telling him to go to Athens, as there his misery would end. So he goes to Athens, dressed in disguise, and gets a position as one of Emily's servants. He quickly moves up the ladder, up the hierarchy of servants, and becomes Theseus's squire because of his deeds, his gentleness, the way he interacts with people, his loyalty, and his skill as a warrior. There is no other man in the kingdom closer to Theseus than Arcite. Remember, Arcite is disguised as Philostrato. Theseus has no idea that this person who he now trusts so much is actually Arcite. Remember, he believes and we have to realize that if he's close to Theseus, then he's going to be close to Emily, because Theseus is Emily's brother-in-law, okay? So he is able to spend time and learn a lot about not only Theseus, but Emily as well. So that is all good fortune for Emily. So now what we'll do is we'll jump back to Palamon. Now remember, this has been 3 years or more, almost 3 to 5 years that Arcite has kind of devised this plan and gone through with it. Palamon has been sitting kind of rotting in jail. In darkness and the horror of a strong prison, Palamon has sat these 7 years, wasted away, what with sorrow and distress. Who but Palamon felt twofold sorrow and grief? Love afflicted him so that for grief he was completely out of his mind, and besides, he was a prisoner forever, not simply for a year. Who could properly tell his martyrdom in English verse? Indeed, I am not the one. Therefore, I pass over as lightly as I can. So the knight talks about, well, Palamon's been sitting in prison these 7 years, lovesick and completely almost dying, not because of his imprisonment, but because he's unable to do anything to woo Emily. So for bad fortune, make sure you have these notes. He's been sitting in prison for 7 years, is mentally and physically deteriorating, and is lovesick. Okay, those are all. This is now the physical and mental manifestation of courtly love. It happened in the 7th year that on the 3rd night of May, as ancient books say, which tell us all this story more fully, whether it was by chance or destiny, as when a thing is fated it shall be, Palamon, soon after midnight, and with the help of a friend, broke out of prison and fled the city as fast as he could. He had given his jailers so much to drink of a spiced honeyed potion made of a certain wine with narcotics and refined opium of Thebes, that all that night, even if the jailer were shaken, he slept and could not wake up. And thus Palamon fled as fast as he could. The night was short and the dawn close by, when, as need was, he would have to hide. With fearful footstep then, Palamon crept to a grove close by. So, our good fortune, that kind of comes out of this, is Palamon escapes from prison. And what he does is he vows to return to Thebes, gather an army together, invade and overthrow Theseus, thus winning Emily's heart. So he thinks about how he's going to actually go, and he sits in a grove, or a grove is like a place in the forest that's like a clearing, and he's going to stay put during the day, and he's waiting for nightfall so he can travel at night. So let's hear a little bit more about Palamon. Briefly, it was his expectation that he would hide himself in that grove all day, and then take his way during the night in the direction of Thebes. in order to ask his friends to help him make war on Theseus. To put in a few words, either he would lose his life or he would win Emily to wife. This was his aim and his full intention. Remember, I said the essence of courtly love is I will either have the girl or I will die. And that is what Palamon has just said. Now I shall return to Arcite, who little knew how near trouble was, until fortune had brought him into the snare. So 7 years go by. Arcite's kind of had this elaborate plan. He's worked up the hierarchy of King Theseus's palace. He's become a trusted good friend of Theseus and of Emily, although no one knows his true identity. Palamon has been sitting and rotting in jail. One day he decides he's going to break free. So he drugs the jailer and escapes with the help of a friend. He then hides in the woods, waiting for nightfall, because he wants to go back to Thebes, gather an army together, come back and overthrow Theseus. The busy lark, the messenger of day, saluted the bright morning with her song, and fiery Phoebus rose up so bright that all the east laughed with his light. Among the branches he dried with his rays the silver drops hanging on the leaves. Arcite, who was in the royal court as chief squire to Theseus, rose and looked out upon the merry day. In order to pay his respects to May, and bringing to mind the object of his longing, he rode out into the fields on a courser, as spirited as fire, in order to amuse himself outside the court, perhaps a mile or two away. To the grove that I told you of, he, by chance, took his way to make himself a garland of the branches, whether they were woodbine or hawthorn, and he loudly sang this song in the face of the shining sun. May, with all your flowers in green, be welcome, fair, fresh May, and hope that I may get some green. And with a happy heart he sprang from his courser and into the grove, and walked up and down in a path where Palamon, by chance, was in a bush where no one could see him. He was terribly afraid that he would be killed. He had no idea that the intruder was Arcite. God knows there's a small chance that he would have imagined it. But it has been said truthfully, for many years past, the field has eyes and the wood has ears. It is very fitting for a man to behave coolly, for one is faced every day with unexpected meetings. Little did Arcite know of his friend, who was so near as to hear all that he said. For Palamon now sat in the bush in complete silence. So Arcite takes it upon himself to go out on a kind of excursion for the day. And he just happens to, by chance, go to the same grove where Palamon is waiting in the bushes for nightfall. Arcite has no idea Palamon is there. Palamon sees that someone has arrived and doesn't know it's Arcite. But Palamon is close enough to Arcite to hear everything that he's about to say. When Arcite had his fill of roaming and had gaily sung all the roundel, he suddenly began to brood, as lovers do in their curious moods. Sometimes in the treetop, other times in the briars, now up, now down, like a bucket in a well. To tell truly, just as on Friday Venus's day sometimes shines and at other times rains continually, just so changeable Venus overcasts the hearts of her followers. Just as her day is changeable, so she changes her arrangements. Seldom is Friday like the rest of the week. This is a very strange digression by the knight when he talks about just how love can change its way and change its opinion. Right now, the knight is kind of interjecting his own opinions of love. When Arcite had sung, he began to sigh and sat down without further ado. He said, "Alas, the day I was born! How long, Juno, in your cruelty will you make war on the city of Thebes? Alas, brought to confusion is the royal blood of Cadmus and Amphion of Cadmus, who was the first man to build Thebes, the first to begin it, and was first crowned king of the city. I am of his lineage, and am his offspring by the true line, being of the royal stock. And now I am so wretched and enslaved that the man who was my mortal enemy I serve meanly as his squire. And Juno does me yet more shame, in that I dare not declare my own name, where I was accustomed to be called Arcite, and now called Philostrato, worth nothing. Alas, cruel Mars, alas, Juno, thus your wrath has destroyed all our line except for me and wretched Palamon, whom Theseus torments in prison. And on top of all this, so as to slay me utterly, love has so ardently thrust its fiery dart through my faithful troubled heart that it seems that my death was prepared for me before my first clothes were made. You slay me with your eyes, Emily. You are the cause of my dying. On all the rest of my cares I would not set the worth of one weed. If I